In 2020, a group of African AI developers, known as the Masakane, set out on a mission. They were searching for data in African languages, hoping to build AI tools and solve African problems for African people.
So at the time, we had a team of text and data miners and data scientists who reached out to CIPIT. They were building a datasets from African languages to train their language models.
But as they searched, they realized that there wasn't much out there. African language datasets were rare, scattered, or incomplete. Still, in that ocean of scarcity, they stumbled upon a hidden gem, the Jehovah Witness website. It had Bible translations in multiple African languages. This became a key resource and was identified as the Jehovah Witness 300 dataset.
After they had actually done the text and data mining, so they reached out to CIPIT to ask questions concerning copyright, and more particularly questions around intellectual property and the data that they were mining, and whether or not they had the permission to use the data that they had already mined and scraped off of the JW website.
At first, the focus was on possibility, not permission. The team didn't immediately stop to consider copyright. But eventually that question emerged. Wait, can we actually use this? So they took a closer look. Like most websites, the Jehovah Witness site had a copyright notice, the kind that spells out exactly what you can and can't do with the content it holds. In this case, the message was clear.
So primarily, the work that we undertook here at CIPIT was to do research around the IP considerations when it comes to text and data mining. So for this particular project, we went ahead to look at the Jehovah Witness website and look at their terms of use and more keenly at their copyright notice, and whether or not they had any provisions permitting or not permitting the use of their data for research work.
It wasn't quite clear to us before that they were having an issue with access, and that the issue was created by copyright or intellectual property. So the JW300 dataset, being one of the few readily available datasets at the time, really showed us that we need to ask questions as to who owns African language datasets, who has access to them, and what does this mean to the people who've also lent their voices to the creation of the datasets.
Together with Masakane, we found ourselves asking, how is it possible that content in African languages spoken across the continent could be owned by an American entity? And why couldn't Africans use their own languages to build tools for their own communities? This means that data enters the public domain. At first glance, that sounds great. Open data for everyone. But here's the catch. Who actually has the capacity to take that data and turn it into tools? Anyone with the technical skills and infrastructure. And often, that means jurisdictions outside Africa. They can build and deploy tools faster, and they know how to market them. The result of this is African developers become the data collectors, while others build the solutions. And even when African innovators are credited, they're still cut off from the full benefits of development and distribution.
So I think the JW300 dataset use case was very interesting for us because it was the first time that we realized that there was an issue with access to African language datasets from the end of African language processors or data scientists or AI developers. So although the JW300 dataset was a result of a translation of the Bible, the question is, who translated it? The Jehovah's Witness is an organization that is registered in the United States of America. Definitely might not have all the knowledge of all the languages that they translated that Bible into. There are definitely African voices that were involved in that. So the linguists who helped translate the Bible are Africans, right? And African language is a cultural asset. Yet the people from these communities cannot access that data set. That really made us ask questions as to what should happen to enable access and also to allow African AI developers to be part of the actual AI ecosystem.
So Masakane had to let go of the JW300 dataset. But in that challenge came a spark. Masakane decided to create their own datasets from scratch. They began collecting language data themselves, and when you need African languages, Where do you turn? You go straight to the source, the people, the communities. Because not every African language even has written texts. In many cases, the voices, the stories, and the people themselves become the living libraries. We know who's doing the collecting, African AI developers. But what about the communities? The people who've generously offered their voices, their language, their time. What happens to them? Where is their recognition? Their say in how that data is used. That's exactly why the NOODL license comes in.
I've worked on data collection for quite a long time. And at the beginning, what we used to do is we get some funds, we go to the community and tell them, okay, for 2,000 shillings, give me your 2 hours. Yeah, of course, we explain to them that the data will be used for building tools that hopefully in the future will be used by your people for different applications. But we never really talked about licensing. We never really talked about how we are planning to release the data, who we are releasing it to, where we are releasing it. We never really talked about that. We explained just what it was going to be used for. Okay, and over the period of time, people start asking themselves, okay, what is it for them? Yes, I know hopefully you can sell the narrative that in future, there'll be an AI agent that you can interact in your language, but they ask yourself, will they come back and sell it to us? Okay, yet you have given us maybe 1,000 shillings, 2,000 to contribute. Then at the end of the day, if I want to use the same resource, I have to again to buy it. Then let us explain to them what licensing means, okay? And give them the opportunity to be able to have a say on how they would like the data to be shared out and if they will want any benefit from it. And it was really not easy even for the community because people are different. People want, okay, I want the money in my pocket. And people want, okay, let's do something for the community. But I think the majority were like, for posterity's sake, we need something that will really make our language last forever. So with the understanding of licensing, they're able now to appreciate that, okay, we can define how we want to share our data and how we want to benefit as a community by sharing this said data. Yeah, so that's how it's so that they're now ready because now they're asking questions about not just giving out their data for free and really not getting anything in return with the efforts they put to preserve the language over the years.
The one thing I really wanted to ensure about NOODL was that the community had a voice. Everybody was telling the community what to do. The open licenses in existence were defining the parameters, and the community was not involved in developing these licenses, obviously. Funders were telling the AI developers how they would share their data and who they could share their data with. And remember that the data community, meaning the AI developers, is just one part. What about the people who actually lent their voices, right? The actual speakers of the language, those who have curated and preserved their language. Where was their input? So that was the crucial part for me in the license, that they had a voice in determining the benefit that they would receive in exchange for them being part of the creation of the data set, and also in determining who had access and what type of access they would have, which is why NOODL is a tiered license.
NOODL is a tiered licensing framework designed for sharing African language datasets in ways that are open for all, yet equitable for the source community. NOODL doesn't try to reinvent the wheel, nor does it claim that there's something fundamentally wrong with existing open licenses. Rather, it acknowledges that context matters. African language datasets require a different lens, a more nuanced approach to ensure that the rights of communities, collectors, and developers are all respected.
One of the key things that stood out for me with the training on African data licensing was the ability to now be able to look at African datasets or just the Luo dataset for languages in terms of intellectual property rights and from a licensing perspective. More importantly was them understanding the small nuances that come into play when they're actually considering what putting out language data sets as being open source and open data without any parameters or precautions to them. And also just trying to see them realize that there is value to the data they put out there, and that it has an element that has to be reciprocal at the end of the day. Taking them through the different parameters and protections that are required for such licensing elements was also significant in trying to help them understand that open doesn't always mean open. And just because something is already out there in the internet doesn't mean that there can be certain parameters to it. Also, it gave me an appreciation of what goes at the back end of actually collecting data sets, especially language data sets, and the nitty-gritties of the technologies or applications or even softwares that can be leveraged based on that kind of data set.
On the NOODL website, you'll find a toolkit designed to guide you whether you're a licensor or a licensee working with African language data. And we started right at the beginning, asking, what are the pre-licensing guidelines? Because those matter. The Maseno Center for Applied Artificial Intelligence at Maseno University, led by Dr. Lilian Wanzare as the research lead, has been working on a project to develop fair licensing practices for African language datasets. As part of this process, they were tasked with either creating a new license or collaborating with an existing one. Maseno recognized the importance of equitable licensing and reached out to CIPIT for training on data licensing frameworks. From this engagement, a collaboration emerged, with Maseno choosing to adopt NOODL license as the guiding framework. Over the past few months, Dr. Melissa Omino and Florence Ogonjo of CIPIT have been closely supporting and collaborating with the team of Doluo data collectors at Maseno University to put NOODL into practice. Together, the teams are not only building datasets, but also embedding the principles of fairness, community recognition, and benefit sharing at the very core of their work.
It is one thing to just say, I'll go and collect data, but it's another thing to really build a framework of collecting this data that can be replicated across different communities. Yeah? And it's not really easy. But at the end of the day, you're thinking about, can we be able to really have this in a better framework that now we know that as a country, this is what we use to collect our data, that anybody who has come and say, we have $10 million, we want to collect data, then this is the process. This is how we do it, this is how we share it, this is how, okay? We really wanted that to come out strongly, okay, from all these processes, yeah? But that has been really, really difficult to be able to get a buy-in from, let's say, the government, from other developers, and from the community themselves, to really have this, put in place.
Other key challenges were with respect to benefits that go back to the community and how those benefits would be accrued in terms of if it's monetary, who would be the channel through which the monetary benefits could be channeled through. But those are elements that with time they were able to clearly outline and clearly define by first defining what the community is, identifying who the community representatives would be. So those were key elements or challenges that would ideally arise, but they were sort of able to go through it because the entire training process was a co-design process with the community, and they were able to come up with their own solutions with the help of parameters already established within the license to come up with terms that were slightly more holistic and relevant to them.
This partnership led to sessions focused on equipping Tholuo language data collectors with deep understanding of why licensing African language datasets matters. This was their introduction to the NOODL framework, and more importantly, to the principle of reciprocity, ensuring that those who contribute are never left behind. The participants worked together to draft the actual terms of the NOODL license. They defined what community means. They discussed ownership and benefit sharing. This Tholuo-speaking cohort has now become the very first community of the NOODL license. A milestone not just in protecting community contributions, but in ensuring that access doesn't lead to exploitation. Instead, it recognizes everyone in the language data value chain, all acknowledged, all considered.
What I've learned is that you cannot do this alone. It cannot be ethical if you're doing it as an individual. And you cannot sit and state that you own it as an individual. That is also not ethical. It belongs to the community. Ethical in an African sense means collective responsibility and collective benefit. It also begs the question of how do we ensure that we continue to preserve and curate. So it's not just about who can use it. It's more about they can use it so that we can continue to create and preserve.
I think there are very many African language data sets that are already open and out there. The key example that you'll notice Dr. Melissa always uses when she gives reference to the NOODL license is how the Maori community have managed to still maintain a sense of sovereignty, so to speak, with respect to how their language is used, especially for different technologies like AI. One key element I would bring out in trying to advise other communities is to see themselves as being an intrinsic part and caretakers and holders of that particular language. That the language that they use, in as much as it is, we are aiming to ensure that there's representation, especially when using different technologies and our languages are represented across the board, that they notice that there's value in the type of data sets that are collected and in the way that they contribute towards building those data sets. And the NOODL license helps to an extent protect them and ensure that they get benefits back to the community they themselves, and that their labor is not taken for granted, and that someone doesn't come and commercialize a data set and make billions out of it, and at the end of the day there's no benefits that actually go back to the community who are the holders of that particular language or even the users of that particular language.
Language does not exist in a vacuum. This is not something that is free for use. It is preserved and curated by communities, and this is what the NOODL license aims to empower: access to and use of African datasets through equitable licensing.
The most profound thing for me, I think, has been to understand that just a few decades ago, people were not allowed to speak their languages in schools, in public places, and that now these languages are so valuable in the emerging technology age, and that we didn't have to do much other than remain ourselves in speaking and creating the language. So I guess that is an aspect of, if you're true to your roots, then technology sort of makes a place for you.